So again, there's plenty of examples. Don't be afraid of it. Face the music, step up to the plate, and figure out what's next.
Welcome to the Passion Struck podcast. My name is John Miles, a former combat veteran and multi-industry CEO turned entrepreneur and human performance expert. Each week, we showcase an inspirational person or message that helps you unlock your hidden potential and unleash your creativity and leadership abilities. Thank you for joining us today on the show, and let's get igniting. Thank you for joining me today on the Passion Struck podcast. Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin III said, "When the situation changes so that the facts are no longer valid or the assumptions that you made are no longer appropriate, then I think you have to go back and revisit your plan." And these simple words are a great introduction for our guest today, my friend and Tampa Bay entrepreneur and executive, Hugh Campbell. In our discussion today, Hugh will go through his life as a West Point cadet, his transition into becoming an Army officer, and then joining the civilian world, and how, after spending several years in industry, he decided to reinvent himself and his career and became a multiple entrepreneur with several successful exits. I think you have so much to look forward to today, and I am thrilled to have Hugh on the show. But let's learn a little bit more about Hugh. Hugh is a veteran, a serial entrepreneur, and is very proud to be a senior member of the Tampa Bay business community. He is currently the president of AC4S Technologies, a business support technology organization. He sits on the board of trustees for Baycare Healthcare, a $4.5 billion organization with over 29,000 employees. And if that's not enough, he is also the chairman of the board of the CEO Council of Tampa Bay. Hi, I am absolutely thrilled to have Hugh Campbell on the show today. Hugh, your background is so impressive. From graduating from West Point to successfully transitioning your life and career into industry, to then reinventing it once again, and this time into becoming a serial entrepreneur. We are so glad to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining.
John, thanks so much for having me. We really appreciate you extending the invitation.
The purpose of our show is to tell our listeners how they can unlock their hidden potential and unleash their creativity and leadership abilities. And I wanted to get this started by having you give a little bit of insight into your background and some of the early transitions you had to make along the way and why you made them.
Wow, it's a lot of stuff in there, obviously. So the military, obviously, graduating from West Point, you go into the Army for a few years, which I really enjoyed, learned a lot, traveled many places, did many things, but ultimately led me here to the Tampa Bay area. But I thought that there might be something beyond the military, so I really fell in love with Tampa. So I decided to exit the military and stay in this region, and that was just a great thing for me. I actually went into the corporate environment. Worked in a great company called Intermedia Communications. Many folks have been around for many years, might remember that organization. It was about $1 billion company doing all kinds of great things in the telecommunications field. But ultimately, I was presented with an opportunity to go do a startup with some folks from that organization. Got introduced to some venture capitalists out of New York City. Who really had the idea for the company, but they were money people, and they ultimately needed operators. And so me and a couple other folks became the leadership team for that idea and that concept, and off we went.
Well, that is great. Hugh, thanks for sharing that inspirational background, which will give the listeners context for the next portions of the interview. What I wanted you to talk about now is to give them some idea on how you mustered the power within to ignite your hidden potential. And how did you do that time and time again?
So that's a great question. So when we started our first company, we had, as I say, other people's money. So the venture capitalists were great in that we got the opportunity to learn a lot. And, certainly they were driven by return on investment and all those things that you hear about. But ultimately they decided that we were going to sell that company. We ended up selling it off actually in pieces and parts, quite honestly. And when we finished that, I knew that I could not go back into the corporate environment. I had that taste, and we knew we could do it. We could take an idea from concept to reality, and generating revenue and hiring employees and doing this and all those things. So that experience gave us the confidence and really the passion, as you would say, to do it again. So I was looking around, trying to figure out what the next thing I was going to start. And I was approached by a couple of different people who knew that I was in the market, so to speak, to try to figure out what I was going to do next. And they had this idea for another company. And this was post 9/11. And it was going back in and helping our military.
Oh, no kidding.
And initially, I was not very enthusiastic about that, quite honestly, because I was having a blast, making good money and getting the exposure to all those new and wonderful things and venture capital and all those things. And I really wasn't too enthusiastic about going back into that military paradigm, the military industrial complex. But they kept after me, and I finally saw the light, and I said, hey, we should give the world. And so I called everybody and said, hey, let's get together, at least have a meeting and see what might be possible. And that meeting was at the West Shore. I think it was the Wyndham Grand or something it was called at that point.
Yeah.
We sat in the lobby bar and started charting out how we might make a go in the federal sector. And as I said, away we went.
Well, that's great. And since you brought up the federal sector in your comments, I wanted to bring up your alma mater for a second and discuss the recent cheating scandal that they had. And you may not know this about me, but I was on the Naval Academy Brigade honor staff when we underwent the largest cheating scandal in Naval Academy history. And I can tell you that experience had a profound impact on me. But I wanted you to talk about the West Point Honor Code, what you think the institution is doing and what that honor code has meant to you since then in your life and career.
Well, so first off, anything that tarnishes the image and all that, because there's really high expectations for all of the service academies, right? The service academies are built to bring the nation's best and brightest to help solve the toughest problems that our countries has. Sometimes that's in conflict and war, but many other times it's all of the various issues that face our country that, the leaders that graduate from all of the service academies are expected to go solve and to continue to serve. So anything that tarnishes that image is just, bad, right? These things happen on occasion, people are involved, right? So
right.
Nothing's perfect. So it's obviously very disappointing, but they'll get past it. They'll get over it, and I'm sure the leadership will take the appropriate actions and hold those people accountable. Every organization that I have led, you know, you got to set the tone. And as the person that's out front leading the charge on whatever it is that you're involved in, you set the tone, you set the culture. And we, in startup companies and the entrepreneurial world and those types of communities, we talk about culture. And, it wasn't not too long ago, the company I'm running now, one of my folks suggested that we not tell a customer a piece of information that would have been to their benefit. And, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but, we had several new people on board but I saw the opportunity to say once again, that's not how we operate. We look after our customers. We're open and honest with our customers. And, sometimes that's to their benefit and sometimes that's to our benefit. So that's just not how we roll. And I don't want to be a part of any organization that is ever questioned about its integrity. My dad was a Methodist minister, right? And, we grew up in a household where you had better be dead to not go to church on Sundays. The West Point duty, honor, country, a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. It's just really an extension of how we were raised. Whatever organization I'm running and a part of, we're going to do the right thing. And we're going to be open. We're going to be honest. And sometimes that's sticky. Sometimes it's hard. But that's the best thing, And in fact, we talked about the harder right instead of the easier wrong. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
Right.
That's what we talk about, right? So that's just how we roll.
Okay, well, thank you, Hugh. And speaking about how you roll, I recently saw some pictures of you doing gymnastics and what I thought were aerobatics. I thought that was great. And I think this had to do with your new role as the chairman of the CEO Council of Tampa Bay. I'd love to hear about this experience, not only about the gymnastics, but about this new role.
Sure. So those pictures were, the CEO Council of Tampa Bay, we do lots of different things. And, I like to call it the sanctuary for CEOs. So, you've heard the term, it's lonely at the top and all those things. Well, it doesn't have to be. And, we look out after leaders and we look out after them from a professional perspective and also from a personal perspective too. And so the pictures that you saw was one of our travel clubs. And we took a bunch of folks down to over to the East Coast of Florida and just had a great weekend with family, friends. In that particular instance, a bunch of us got to do some trapeze work that turned out to be pretty fun. So for 2021, I'm the current chairman of the board for the CEO Council. And really that's been a labor of love. I absolutely love the organization. I'm not a guy that, you get to a certain point and you forget where you came from and you forget all your friends. But I will say that many of my friends over the last 10 years or so have come from the CEO Council because, it's where you go to ask questions. Hey, am I going down the right path? Is my thought process the right thing? Validation of your concept, your ideas, because no matter what you're going through in whatever organization you're leading, somebody in the CEO Council has been through that. If you're trying to raise capital, you have problems with your CFO, lawsuits, selling, increasing sales, revenues, all of those issues. Somebody's been through it. We had an issue with some folks with franchising. And that's, oh, well, if you're thinking about franchising, you should go talk to this guy because, they franchised and they grew from 3 locations to 50 locations, So there's plenty of those examples. And I'm just tickled pink that my peers and contemporaries would afford me the opportunity to lead the organization.
Yeah, I think that's an honor. In fact, whether you're an entrepreneur or someone who wants to get on the track of having a different mindset, it is so important to have the right advisors and mentors in your life. Those people who can guide you on your passion journey and going from one step to the next and making sure that you're committed to it and you execute upon it. So if you're an entrepreneur who's listening to this show, can you give them some advice on what type of mechanisms you use in your career and what type of accountability system you have and could recommend to them to use in theirs?
Yeah. So, if you're an entrepreneur or, starting out, you always want to find those advisors. And sometimes it's a board of advisors. Sometimes it's more formal. It's a board of directors. I've had a couple of different boards over the years serve as both advisory and both as board of directors. And that is very important because it can, from a personal and professional perspective as the leader of the organization, just like you said, you gotta get somebody to hold you accountable, right? Ask you the questions, the tough questions. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? How are you executing on plan A, plan B, whatever it is that you're working on? Why didn't you get that accomplished? What was the impediment to getting that accomplished? What are you going to change? What are you going to do differently? So it's very important to assemble that team around you to hold you accountable. And the other thing for advisors and board of directors, those folks, if you choose the right people who are passionate about whatever it is you're trying to get done, they can help you and open doors for you and get you that meeting that you might not necessarily get. Introduce you to capital, introduce you to potential customers. If you're doing acquisitions, hey, there's a company over here that you might want to look at merging or acquiring, whatever, all of those things. So it's very important to get that team around you. And I've had board of advisors, I've had board of directors in various companies.
That is some great advice, Hugh. And it is so important as an entrepreneur or someone who's a growth seeker to have that mentor, that guide who can help them on their path to achieving their life dreams and taking the critical steps and holding them accountable. I was working with a CEO a number of years ago who I was trying to give advice to. And unfortunately, he did what many people often do. He used his ego instead of really listening to the advice of others. And I'll tell you just a short little story. He was trying to build this new social network, and he was trying to build this huge product all in one step. And I gave him important advice that you needed to build a viable product, something that you could start showing to investors, get out on the market, start seeing how people are reacting to it, because you don't always know when you're building something if what you think is the final destination is actually the final destination. And he continually stopped to listen to me. And then he took a road trip out on the West Coast and met with a bunch of prominent venture capitalists and other investors. And guess what? He came back and told his team, guess what? We need to build this minimum product. That's what all these people said, and take that approach instead of the path that we're taking right now. And I find so often one of the most critical things that you have to do is to pick a guide who's going to challenge you. And often that is not what we want because it's easier to be comfort. And that is not always what we want because it's easier to be comfortable than it is to be challenged. And Hugh, I am sure you've been in that same situation before. Can you tell me about a scenario in your life and how that played out?
If you're providing advice and counsel and they don't adhere to it, it's kind of frustrating, but ultimately they'll learn.
And Hugh, looking at your background, you've had to pivot many times in your career, from leaving West Point to becoming an Army officer to going into the civilian world and into an industry position, and then again having to pivot and reinvent yourself into this role of being a serial entrepreneur. Can you give our listeners some advice on how do you do those pivots and how do you overcome the fears and obstacles along the way?
That's a great question. I think, certainly, 2020 and 2021 have been challenging for the entire planet. And it's forced people to, seriously reassess what they're doing. I think the biggest thing is, overcoming your fear, right? I was on a call not too long ago, and one of the things that we were talking about was, last year when the pandemic started, lots of folks were figuring out how to hang on to the revenue they had, and the business model they had. And that's fine. That's probably okay. But really, what you should be doing and should have done is looking at the new opportunities that presented themselves. There's an age-old saying, in every crisis, there's opportunity. And, if you're stuck looking in the rearview mirror on what you once had from a business model perspective, a customer perspective, whatever, revenue, if you're stuck looking in the rearview mirror, you're not looking forward. And if you're the leader of the organization, you need to be thinking about what's next, not what happened before.
Hugh, I think that's a very great point. And, I've experienced something very similar. When I first arrived here, I was the chief digital officer and head of global operations at Catalina Marketing. And when I joined, we were in the cusp of trying to go from paper printers that were at the registers of mass grocery and pharmacies into a digital media company. And I kept running into obstruction after obstruction after obstruction about why people wanted to stay with the way things were done currently instead of really looking at maximizing the way that we could do things and trying to automate many of the manual tasks that were happening at that time in the company. And I think we get so stuck sometimes in our past and what made us successful that we can't focus on where we need to go in the future. How have you seen that play out in your life?
There's just plenty of examples of folks that looking in the rearview mirror as opposed to what's coming. I mean, just tons of examples. I mean, from, Eastman Kodak to Blockbuster to, the newspaper industry, right? There's just tons and tons of examples. And, it really, it used to be that, hey, you better watch out because there's some kid in Silicon Valley that's going to change your business model. Well, it wasn't a kid in Silicon Valley. It was, it was a pathogen, right? It was a virus that changed so many business models. I don't know what the answer is, but the cruise industry, they should be asking themselves, what are they going to do differently? How can they change their business model given, everything that's happened? Um, their whole thing was, we're going to spend $1 billion on a brand new ship, right? And we're going to stuff as many people on this ship as, 5,000, 6,000 people on this ship, and, try to make as much money as we can on one cruise. What does that look like in 2021 and 2022, right? Again, there's plenty of examples. Don't be afraid of it. Face the music, step up to the plate, and figure out what's next.
Did you know that Forbes magazine recently cited that 70% of individuals who do personal development, masterminds, and one-on-one coaching benefited from better work performance, increased communication skills, and overall better relationships? And we at Passion Struck are obsessed with self-development, coaching, and mentorship. That is why we've created a free resource to help you unlock your hidden potential. Because people doing great things in business and life are just like you, only they've had a coach along the way. And we've got that covered too. Let us show you the systems and frameworks that we teach growth-minded individuals to help them step into their sharp edges, execute on their passion journeys, and get predictable results time and time again. Go to passionstruck.com/coaching right now, and let's get igniting. Yeah, on those lines, I've been seeing this thing that I call the rise of the comfort zone. It's something that I talk about in my origin episode a lot. It's the contagion of the human mindset. And that contagion is, we think that we reach this point where we can't learn anymore, and we get into this zone of fixed perception, where we think we've learned what we know. We're comfortable with where we're at, and we, because of that comfort, don't want to push the boundaries because we're worried about what might happen on the other side of that. Could we fail? Could we embarrass ourselves in front of our social circles? Could we potentially have to go out and tell people that we failed or face it internally? And I think it is this comfort zone, along with apathy, that are getting in the way of us truly living a purpose-driven life. And I think this is especially true with millennials and in Generation Z, where they seem to be stuck in this cautious zone instead of really forcing themselves to do the hard work and to do what makes them passionate. And I'd like to hear from you what you were seeing, because I know you have a son a little bit younger than mine, but what are you seeing as you're working with these generations of leaders?
I think that certainly there's some risk, I guess you could say, with those next generations. But I also talk to quite a few folks, and we were just talking about the service academies a minute ago. There are plenty of kids, youngsters, that still sign up, raise their hand, and decide to put their country before themselves, and take the oath. So, I hear lots of folks in leadership positions, concerned about what that next generation is going to be like. I think, it's going to be different. Obviously, it's not going to be the same, as it has been. But they'll be just fine. They'll be just fine. It's incumbent upon us to find those diamonds in the rough and grow them, mentor them, and show them the path. And that's really our challenge, right? We got to go out and find those kids. They exist. They're out there. They just need to be motivated. They need to be inspired. They need to be passionate. And we can expose them to those things, and we can show them the path. And I think we'll be okay.
Well, speaking of those kids, Hugh, I have a 22-year-old son, and I am trying to give him wisdom in many of our one-on-one dinners that we do. things that I want to impart on him to get him to think differently and to help inspire him to live his life in a different way. But I wanted to ask you, if you had to go back and talk to that 22, 24, 25-year old version of yourself, what would you say to him now?
My 24, 25-year-old self. Don't be afraid of change. Nothing stays the same. Go out and attack and be passionate about that next thing. When I was in my 20s, I was still in the military, wondering, if I was going to make a career out of it, do 20 years and all of those things. And I was having a blast. I was jumping out of airplanes. I was, doing all kinds of crazy things, classified operations, all of those things. It was fun. It was really fun. But I can also say now that, staying in Tampa has been the best thing that ever could have happened for me. And, Tampa the Tampa Bay region has just been the most wonderful thing for me personally. And there were some dark periods of not knowing what's going to happen. When I first got out of the military, was I going to the right company? Could I make that transition? Going from corporate to being an entrepreneur, going from having, venture capital backing to doing it yourself with your own money, that's scary, right? Using your own money to bring a concept to reality. But don't be afraid of it. That's what I would probably tell my 24 or 25-year-old self. Things are going to change. Don't be afraid of it. And just, like I always say, attack the problem.
Well, those are absolutely words to live by, Hugh. And, I like to listen to a lot of different podcasts. And one of the ones that I try to listen to frequently is by Gary Vee. And, Gary Vee has a lot of followers. Not everyone loves him. But one thing that I really take is true words of wisdom from him is when you ask him time and time again what the most important thing he tells people are, it's that they need to have patience. And I find that was something when I was younger, I wasn't very good at. I was such a hard charger. Patience might have been the last thing you would have described me as having. But I want to ask you, what do you feel about this idea of being patient? And is that something that has become a part of how you have approached your career?
Well, I'm probably the last guy on the planet that should be talking about patience. That's not one of my virtues. But I will tell you that, there's been lots of folks with the right idea. And the question is timing, right? Does the timing work for X, Y, and Z? If you go back in the telecom industry, there was I can't remember the CEO's name. He was leading AT&T, and he thought that you should put internet, cable TV, and the phone all together in a bundle and serve that to the consumer, and spent billions and billions of dollars assembling the companies that could deliver that. But he was like 5 or 10 years too early, and it turned out to be exactly the right thing, probably 10 years down the road. So there is some value in patience and all those things. Timing's very important. But there's not much more I can say on that because I'm not a very patient guy.
Well, out of curiosity, as we approach the end of 2020, are there any interesting movies, books, or other things that you have been reading or watching as you go into 2021 that you want to use as guideposts as you set your sights on next year? Please give us some examples so the listeners can get some of those words of wisdom.
Quite honestly, John, I will tell you that I am always a student of leadership. It just comes from, how I was raised, and certainly the military academy. West Point's, really, really big on leadership. We study leadership. Um, and I think that um, in the uncertain times that we're in and all that we've been through, really not only us, but literally around the world, it really boils down to leadership. And I don't care if it's being a leader in the community, being a leader of your company, being a leader at your church, or whatever it is. Strong, positive leadership is the thing that can make a world of difference. And I'm always a student of it. I think, certainly the pandemic last year and how it's playing itself out now requires leadership. And, because in the final analysis, in uncertain times, people look for strong, positive leadership.
Oh, I couldn't agree more to what you just said. But let's dig that a little bit deeper and kind of transition into another area. It's one thing to have this career focus, but being passion struck is not only about creating this career you want, it has two other important factors as well. And one of those has to be around your health and wellness, and the other one is enhancing the relationships that you're in. And I believe without the three of those ecosystems working together and in unison, we really struggle to reach the goals we need to achieve. And so I wanted to ask you, with you having a son, how do you balance the time between, this entrepreneurship career and that Tampa Bay executive life that you have and giving the quality of time to your son?
There's, those that ebbs and flows. I will tell you, I think, the most important part is communicating, right? So, if you've got a period of time where it's going to be tough, you got a lot on your plate, you got to communicate that to those around you, so that they know that we're sacrificing now so that it will be better later. And then you have to be disciplined. You got to be disciplined in knowing when you got to kind of shift the focus, right? You can work yourself to death. Absolutely. You can work. But there comes a point where you got to spend time with the family, spend time with your friends, and invest your time in those relationships and all those things that will ultimately reap its own rewards as well. So, it's a tough question, especially if you're an entrepreneur. You can work all day, every day, 20 every day of the year, and all those things. But you got to figure out when to balance those things. And I don't pretend to have the right answer. There will be some giving and taking, and you got to balance over the long term. It's not always going to be an even thing, but you have to invest in the people around you as well, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And my girlfriend is a nurse practitioner, and she and I see the world so differently. And what I truly respect about her is how she is helping me see things as I talk to her about this new brand, Passion Struck, and my personal mission to make passion go viral. How through her alien eyes, it completely flips the perspective that I have. And she helps me along the way be one of my accountability partners and helps me see what I'm doing right and what I can desperately need to work on to do better in the future. And it's not always going to be easy, but it is so important to invest in those around us, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, you it's a great example of, tough. Elon Musk, when Tesla was rolling out the Model 3, that was a very critical stage for that company, and trying to go from high-end luxury cars to, EVs for the masses. And, they were running out of cash. They had a lot of problems with early production, and it almost killed the company. And that took a lot of time and effort, leadership, to see that company through that very, very difficult period. But look what's transpired, and they popped out the other end, and now they're one of the most valuable automotive company on the planet, right? So that's a great example of that balance. Sometimes it's going to get out of whack, right? But ultimately, in that particular case, it paid off handsomely.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring Elon Musk up. In one of the chapters of my book, Passion Struck, I write about Elon Musk, and I talk about this thing called the B internal effect, which I'll talk about in depth in a future podcast episode. But it's all about how do you dream big but act small. And as you talk about Tesla, one of the things that people don't realize about Tesla and some of his other brands is how much that Elon Musk has perfected this ability to do both. And it's absolutely critical that you learn how to do the same in your life. You need to understand how you keep sight of that big, audacious, long-term goal, but how you work on it and keep accountable to it and commit to it through your daily, weekly, and monthly goals. So thank you so much for bringing Elon Musk up. And in a podcast that's following this one, I'm going to talk about how you need to confront the brutal reality of what's facing you in your life. And I got this from Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who was a Medal of Honor winner and a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 6 or 7 years. And in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about what it takes to confront those brutal fears, his words of wisdom, and how Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, applied them into his lessons. And one of the things that Jim Collins talked about by studying Stockdale was the need to use things like red light mechanisms to alert you when you've got things going on in your life that you need to face and how you overcome them. And what advice do you have, and what mechanisms do you use to recognize these and deal with them?
That's a great question. Do we have any? I think, the most important thing is you have to be able to spot, there's always subtle changes, right? But usually then there'll be one that'll pop up, and that will be, the red star cluster, the red flag, whatever you want to call it, that really signals a sea change. I'll give you a perfect example. When we were starting the current company we're running right now, AC4S Technologies, we do tech support for businesses and nonprofits in the southeastern United States. We started the company, and we were looking at, cloud migrations and those kinds of things. It was about 7 or 8 years ago, and people really weren't sure about using the cloud, implementing the cloud for their organizations, particularly, good-sized companies. And, there was a bit of work, and really there were two things that, one was kind of subtle, and that was Apple's iCloud, and how Apple's iPhone would sync to the iCloud, and you could get your pictures, right, up in the iCloud. So that was a kind of an evolutionary kind of a thing. And that was going along, and the consumer was using it. But certainly, large enterprises weren't there yet. And then the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, put out a contract and said that they were going to use the cloud for their stuff. And it was a big deal. So to me, that was a watershed event. And we decided that we were going to capitalize on that, because our pitch was, if the CIA can use the cloud for their stuff, there's no company on the planet that says their data is too valuable to go into the cloud. But the evolutionary part was Apple's iCloud with the consumer. So I think you got to look at those subtle red flags and then the big one, right? You got to recognize what's going on.
And I've got a little bit of insight on that, actually. I remember when that was actually happening, and I was working with the Salesforce founders, Parker Harris and Mark Benioff. And given my military experience, I was telling them at this time I was working at Dell that the systems that they were using for the cloud for their commercial clients couldn't be used in the government. And I remember Parker looking at me saying, "What do you mean it can't be used?" And I was telling him, you have to create a separate instance, because the data of all those other companies can't be commingled in any way if you want to work with the federal government. And I just remember him saying, "Are you absolutely kidding me? Do you know how much effort and money that's going to take?"
Yeah. Yep.
Hugh, thank you so much for your words of advice on covering so many different items with me, and for being such an inspirational beacon of light in the Tampa Bay business community. But one area I really wanted you to go on record with before we get off this podcast is for you to talk about veterans, since you and I are both one. And what advice would you give veterans who may be listening to this podcast who are in the middle of a transition, whether that's a transition from active duty to civilian life or another transition in their life?
John, thanks for that. I appreciate ending on that note. So first off, yes, it's going to be different. But for veterans and those people that are transitioning out, everybody gets out of the military at some point. So it's just a matter of when. Don't be afraid of it. You have been exposed to many, many things that's valuable in the private sector. I tell many of them that, here's your opportunity to come into the sunlight and show what you can do, how you can contribute, and all the things that you learned that can have a valuable place in our communities and our societies and our companies and all those things. And for some of those folks, depending on the path they choose, it's about to be the most affluent time of your life. So it has that potential. So don't be afraid of it. This is going to be a great and wonderful thing, making the transition. You just have to find your path.
That is great advice. And thank you so much, Hugh Campbell, for coming on the show and giving such a dynamic interview. Our listeners are going to just love what you have to say. Thank you again so much, Hugh Campbell.
John, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
What an amazing episode with Hugh Campbell. What inspirational advice he gives creators, veterans, entrepreneurs about his journey, his path, the obstacles he had to overcome, and the advice on how you can do it too. Thank you so much for watching today, and please watch us or listen to us every Tuesday and Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. The purpose of our show is to make passion go viral. And we do that by sharing with you the knowledge and skills that you need to unlock your hidden potential. If you want to hear more, please subscribe to the Passion Struck podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts at. And if you absolutely love this episode, we'd appreciate a 5-star rating on iTunes and you sharing it with 3 of your most growth-minded friends so they can post it as well to their social accounts and help us grow our Passion Struck community. If you'd like to learn more about the show and our mission, you can go to passionstruck.com where you can sign up for our newsletter, look at our tools, and also download the show notes for today's episode. Additionally, you can listen to us every Tuesday and Friday for even more inspiring content. And remember, make a choice, work hard, and step into your sharp edges. Thank you again for joining us.